And the reality that I was given and that I fully accepted uncritically was what my reality was. And I didn't even know that there was another possibility. You know, things like ideas like that life is supposed to be a certain way. And that life has to be that way for me to be okay. See, the idea that my well-being was so dependent on what today I would call environmental support or what was happening around me was something I was raised with. It was a part of the way my family functioned, the way that my mother and my father and all of the extended family that I interacted with growing up, that was their consciousness. I've shared with you guys before that, my father died when at a very early age in my life. He was 39, I was 11 years old. And this was my grandfather's only son. And when I would spend time with him after my father's death, his lament would always be, this is not the way life was supposed to be. Meaning that there was somehow a script out there. Now, I didn't know where this mysterious script was kept. Patrick, did you ever figure that out? Where did they keep the script about how life was supposed to be? But somehow people were always talking about this supposed to be script that was out there that my life was supposed to follow. Now, I didn't even, at that age, 11, I didn't understand what that meant. But what it was doing, it was shaping something inside of me and setting a schema or a set of expectations that life had to look a certain way for me to be okay. And when it did not, when reality did not conform to this expectation, the only response I seen in the adults around me. Now, once again, we say we get all these messages growing up, some of which are verbal, but I think the strongest messages we get growing up are the messages we see in how people are behaving and how they're functioning in life. So what I saw when things didn't go the way they were supposed to be, my grandfather just could not accept that his son was no longer alive. He fell into a deep and dark depression that he never came out of. In fact, he died of a broken heart about 3 or 4 years later. Totally, his life fell apart. My mom, she's a first generation Italian American. And if you know anything about the Italians and grief, they wear black for a year. And I've said to everybody, it felt like she painted the house black inside, that all the walls were painted black, that there was just this profound grief and she could hardly function. She wasn't there to give me any comfort and my siblings any comfort about the loss we had. And that's the other thing that I was learning, is that this world meant that everybody was out for themselves. I didn't see anybody being able to get out of themselves with the pain that they were experiencing and reach into my world. Now think about this. I'm 11 years old. Not one adult in my universe ever came to me and said, Alan, what is it like to lose your father? I know he meant so much to you. What was it like to see him dying of cancer? What's that like for a 10-year-old boy to see this man that he loved and cherished dying an inch at a time and suffering terribly and being unable to do anything to help him? That was a terrible, traumatic experience for me. And not one person ever showed any curiosity about my experience. They were also lost into their own world. So that was the other thing. My way of life said, this is every man for himself and every woman for themselves. It's no wonder that I became so self-reliant at 11 years old. But how can I, at 11 years old, be self-reliant and take care of myself when I just learned to wipe my ass? I mean, it's ridiculous to put that kind of an expectation on myself. And yet I did. From that moment on, my life became a test of my invulnerability. I did not want to need anyone. I did not want anyone. I was never going to be hurt. again, like I was hurt in losing my father. I was going to take care of myself and be my own person. And I thought that that's what it meant to be a real man. Now, one of the things I look back, I remember I was flying Hawaii one year. I probably had about 20 years of sobriety and recovery. And I was asked to speak at this first men's conference that they were having of all the different fellowships on the island of Oahu. And as I was flying over there, I was reading this book by Dr. Aaron Kipnis, because I was very much into the men's movement, still am in many ways. And it was called Knights, and Knights spelled with a K, Knights Without Armor. And he was talking about how each man in his own way picks up this idea about following what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey, the hero's journey. And the way that my dad manifested that idea was that he suffered in silence, that a real man does not expose and does not be vulnerable, does not burden his family with how he feels. He tries to deal with everything himself. So here I am sitting with my father when he's dying of cancer, and we never talk about it. We never talk about the reality that's going on in our life, that here he is, he loves his family, and he's not going to be around to see us grow up, not going to be around to contribute, to shape our lives, to support us, to provide for us. It had to kill him knowing the kind of man he was. And he couldn't open that up and share that with anyone. I'm certain he didn't talk to anybody about that, about what he was experiencing. And I didn't dare open up and talk about how scared I was about what I saw happening to him. All my security and all this feeling of safety I had was crumbling around me. And there was no one that showed any interest in my talking about that experience. And I didn't. I swallowed it. I kept it all in. I became self-reliant. I had to deal with this alone. Now, trust me, I had no way of how to deal with losing my father, and for my life to be blown up and our family's life to be blown up the way it was incredibly traumatic for me. I had no way of knowing how to cope with it. And then when I started drinking when I was 12 years old, I took that first drink and all of a sudden it made everything that wasn't okay, okay. I tell people all the time, I don't know if I was born an alcoholic, but the minute I took that drink, an alcoholic was born, because at that moment, I discovered what I've discovered in doing this work with emotional sobriety, and that was emotional freedom. The problem is that freedom came at a price because it wasn't free. I was now going to be held hostage to alcohol and other drugs for my freedom. So if we need something other than ourselves to be free, guess what? That's not freedom. But that's the only way that I knew to be free at that time. That's the only thing I discovered. I had no idea that there was another possibility than that. That was my consciousness at that point in time. I didn't see any other possibilities. What was happening, what was happening. And the idea that there was some other possible reality or some other possible way of coping was not even on the radar. Not on my radar, not on anybody's radar in my life. Not until my recovery started in 1971. I talk all the time about recovery being the discovery of new possibilities. And my goodness, that has been true over the 52 years of this journey that I've been on. And that's all still being revealed to me to this very day. So when I say I was asleep and I was in a trance, I was, and I didn't even have any idea about that. No, I was clueless. It's Gurdjieff says, we're asleep, dreaming we're awake. I thought I was awake. I thought I was living life. And I was living my way of life. But that was only one way of life, only one possibility. And there's so many others I've now discovered. But I didn't know that. I didn't know what I didn't know. I couldn't see what I couldn't see. So there was a lot of these ideas, these concepts of who I should be, how life should be, what I should be doing, how I should be feeling. So my life was determined by a set of ideas and concepts that I tried to actualize and become. But they weren't me. They were somebody else's ideas, somebody else's notions of what life was supposed to look like, how life was supposed to be. And it was like I was living this inauthentic life. I was a big phony. And inside, I felt that phoniness. I was always concerned that, if you really got to know me, that you'd see I wasn't who I really was. And I wasn't, because that wasn't me. I'm trying to live up to all these ideas. Ideas like life should be easy. Well, God, life is anything but easy. I love what Scott Peck said in the beginning of his book, The Road Less Traveled. Life is difficult. My goodness, I understand that today. And if I could have accepted that as a baseline, it would have helped me cope with a lot more things. Instead of expecting that life is supposed to be easy, I expected that all the time. You see, these expectations like that were so out of alignment with what reality was, with what this human experience is for all of us, made life and made it an impossible way of life for me. I resonated so much with what Bill Wilson said about this impossible way of life. These ideas and concepts I have, and I'm still discovering some even after 52 years. So many of these things are unconscious and they continue to get revealed. I love that line in the big book. It says more and more will be revealed to us if we stay on this journey, and it is. So that's what life was like, right? I'm asleep, I'm living with these ideas on how I'm supposed to be. I'm only able to feel free and okay when I'm getting drunk or when I'm getting high. And of course, none of that is working very well. It's, as my addiction progresses, I'm getting worse and worse. And by 17, I'm a full-blown alcoholic addict, or by 19, I should say, when I came back from Vietnam. That test of my invulnerability, boy, that just showed up in so many different ways. I drank recklessly. The amount of alcohol. I'm surprised that I didn't end up in the hospital with alcohol poisoning, and I probably should have a few times, but nobody was really diagnosing that back then, that we all drank that way. The way I behaved in Vietnam was completely reckless. I put myself, thank God I didn't put others at risk, but I put myself at risk in some really, really dangerous situations over and over and over again. And I'm just very grateful that I'm here today to be with you and to be sharing about my recovery, because I could have been very easily taken prisoner by the Viet Cong, or in the area I was at, they were, capturing US Marines and then torturing them just outside of our base so we could hear them scream at night. Talk about post-traumatic stress. And, and they wanted us to send a patrol out so that they could then ambush that patrol and take more Marines captive. And so we were in this position of hearing one of our buddies being tortured and not being able to do anything for him. It was pretty terrible. But that's what it was like over there. That's what it was like when a young man at 18 years old is in combat. I have a son, and when he was 18, I couldn't imagine sending him off to combat. Such a young, innocent person, but that innocence all disappeared for me. So I come back from Vietnam, and I'm loaded with all these ideas about who I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be this way to be okay, still trying to live up to a concept. And then I go into recovery and I meet Tom, who really I just can't begin to express what he's meant to me. I think I'm very fortunate to have a relationship with a sponsor over 52 years of my recovery. I think that that's not the typical experience that people have in recovery. And I think it's unfortunate because there's nobody on this planet that knows me and has been there for me and has given me what I would consider unconditional love like Tom has. I know what the meaning of that is like from the relationship we've had. And he's just been there for me and saved me. I can't tell you at how many different points and times when I've been in a personal crisis, especially the recent one that I've been going through. So again, to come into recovery, and I start realizing that all of these ideas I had about who I was supposed to be, how I was supposed to act, how I was supposed to feel, really were nonsense. All of a sudden, there was a crack in my consciousness. And I started to see that the problem wasn't the alcoholism, the drinking. Oh, yes, that created a lot of problems in my life. But my problem was a problem of living with the kind of consciousness I had. The tools I had made it impossible to be engaged in life in a way that was going to be nourishing, that was going to enrich me, that was going to nourish me. My interaction with life and my expectations subtracted from my existence did not add to it. They diminished me. They diminished possibilities for me. They subtracted possibilities from my life. And recovery now starts to expose all of these possibilities that I could never have imagined coming off the streets of Chicago or off of Hill 55 in outside of Da Nang in Vietnam. Never have imagined. And the first thing that happened is when I sat down with Tom and he started to ask me about my life. And all of a sudden he starts to challenge some of the ideas I have about how I'm functioning. And it was like, what? There's another possibility? It was like all of a sudden my eyes started opening up, or another way of thinking about it. Herb Kagan talks about it. It's like Tom was giving me a new pair of glasses, some new lenses to look at my experience in my life with. One of the first things I looked at was this idea that I had to suffer alone. That was a strong one. I was not comfortable at all sharing with you, especially because it might mean that I would somehow start to need you in some way, and then you could hurt me and I'd be vulnerable. But all of a sudden, Tom, for whatever reason, was able to make me feel safe with that, with him. He was a safe person in my life, and probably the first person I ever felt safe with, since losing my father. Because he really cared. I felt like he had no other agenda than wanting to make a difference in my life in a good way. And I'll tell you, that kind of relationship is so therapeutic and so healing. He believed in me, and at that point, I didn't have much belief in myself. I was a high school dropout when I met Tom. I hardly went to school. I thought I was quite stupid, actually. I didn't think much of myself. My self-esteem was in the gutter. And he saw something in me that I could not see in myself, and I am so thankful that he had the faith in me that he had. He didn't trust me because he knew I was still filled with a lot of nonsense, right, in terms of these ideas I had about how I was supposed to be. But he had faith that there was something inside of me that could grow me into what I could be. Not what I thought I should be, but what I can be. A life that's based on a relationship, an appropriate relationship to reality, including an appropriate relationship to myself, is to be able to understand who I am and to be able to start to begin to accept some of my limitations and be able to face the mistakes I was making instead of having this idea that I had to be perfect to be okay, that I had to be invulnerable to be okay. All of these things were nonsensical. But I tried to live up to those. That's the impossible way of life that I was talking about. So things start to unfold with him. I get close to him, and the thing that I was so impressed with Tom was his freedom to be himself. I had never had in a relationship with someone who was so honest about who he was and what was going on in his life and was able to talk about it and cry about it if he needed to and experience it. And he encouraged me to have experiences that did the same. I'll remember early on, this was in the first 6 months of my recovery. There was at that point in 1970, the human potential movement was in full blossom, right? In full bloom. And it was an exciting time, right? We're going to these weekend marathon workshops and these padded rooms with bean bags on the floor and hippie facilitators running the groups and stuff like that. And, talking to different parts of ourselves, beating, these bean bags with these batakas and stuff like that. The emotional release work we were doing. It was an exciting time. I really love all that stuff, and once I started to experience it and work past all the fear I had about it. But I went to this workshop with a group facilitator. He was an anthropologist, trained as a Gestalt therapist. I'm trained as a Gestalt therapist, and his name was Sasha. And he was an anthropologist teaching at the University of Hawaii. And I remember the first exercise he did with the group. Look, I've had a ton of training in group therapy, and today I realized it was such a very basic exercise. He just asked everybody to close their eyes for a minute and imagine someone that they need to say goodbye to. Just imagine someone that you have unfinished business with, that you need to say goodbye to, that you don't have, that you've never had a complete, finished experience saying goodbye to them. Well, who came to my mind? You guys know that answer to that now, right? My father. And so when it came to my turn to share, there was about 15 people in the group, maybe a few more, maybe a few less. And I started to share who I was thinking about. He knew exactly that I needed to do some work. He throws a pillow in front of me and says, okay, your father's sitting on that pillow, say goodbye to him. We didn't talk about my feelings. He asked me to experience them. So think of I want you to hear the difference. He didn't ask me about my feelings. He asked me to experience my feelings. We do not grow by talking about things. I want you to hear that. If you hear nothing else that I say today, you cannot recover by talking about your recovery. Recovery is an experience. It is not an idea. It is a felt experience that comes from you exploring what you are experiencing in the here and now, even if what you're experiencing is something in the past that you have to bring it into the here and now to deal with it. That's the only thing that's possible. Right now is where I discovered my recovery. Right now is where I started to discover new possibilities. And it's not in an idea. It was in having a different experience with the experience I was having. Well, first, the words that came out of my mouth that night when I started to say goodbye to my father, I was blown away at what I was experiencing that I was doing. I never imagined that that it was a possibility and that I had the capacity to deal with my feelings in the way I was dealing with them that night, with Sasha's support and the group support and encouragement. I cried, I yelled at my dad, I brought God into the room and we had it out. I talked to my grandfather, my mother. I mean, I worked for probably 4 hours that night, screaming and yelling and throwing tantrums, and all of me was welcomed into that room that night. And I started to experience what it actually means to recover ourselves. I started to recover these parts of myself that I had cut off because of all of the ideas I had about how I was supposed to be and how you were supposed to live your life. Now I'm crying, I'm screaming, I'm talking, I'm It was unbelievable. And after 4 hours, I remember the last piece of work I did, I was laying on the floor, pounding my arms and kicking my legs like a little baby throwing a temper tantrum. Oh, I threw some great tantrums. Think about when's the last time you threw a tantrum? So when we're done, I want everybody to go lay on your bed, have a tantrum, get really pissed off about something, right? And just have it out with whoever it is that you want to have it out with, or get angry at God or whoever you need to get upset with. Go do it. It was amazing to be that free, to let myself experience what I was really experiencing, and to realize that if I really created the space, I could find the words that most accurately reflected what was going on. You see, that's how I was starting to reclaim myself. I could start to hear myself for the first time say things that I needed to hear, instead of looking for you to say something I needed to hear. I found what I needed to hear and say and do. I started to take my center of gravity back at the beginning of my journey 52 years ago. Doesn't happen overnight. I still lose it at times and still take it back and stuff. But that night, that went from day into night. I think I finished working at about 2 a.m. And some people stayed up with me the whole time. There were some people sleeping in the group. And you know what? Didn't matter what they were doing, because I was doing what I needed to do. And that's the other thing I learned. If I am staying in touch with what's important to me, it doesn't matter about what you're doing and how you feel about it, because it's what I needed to do. And it's not that you're not important, you are, but at that moment, I had to take care of what was going on with me before I could give anything to you. We say, if you can't be close to yourself, how in the world can you be close to another person? It's impossible. And I was never close to myself, but I did that night. I started to have a very intimate relationship with myself, which was a wonderful thing. Wonderful thing. I opened my eyes that night after doing that piece of work. And the experience, I can feel it and remember it. It's like it's happening right now. My perception feels like it was the acuteness, the clarity, the vividness of colors. It was unbelievable how alive I was. My body was tingling with energy. I was so energized, so excited about what I was experiencing, even though it was a tremendous amount of pain. I became alive that day in that group. And I believe to this very day, that experience was every bit as important as the night I met my sponsor, Tom. Because while I saw the freedom in Tom that night, and I saw that he had it, when I was in that group, I experienced firsthand what it meant to be free. Unbelievably powerful. I thank God to Sasha for running that group that day and supporting me. The other thing that happened, I think my voice dropped like 2 octaves. It got so much deeper, because now I was living in myself, not out of myself. Isn't that cool? That was so cool. I love that I get to do that with people now. We just had this 3-day intensive here at this house, and so many of the people walked away at my place here in Pennsylvania, walked away with such a similar experience that I had that day. So I'm so blessed that I get to kind of be a midwife and help other people experience that same experience with themselves. It's quite a sacred honor that I get to do now today. And that's what, I call it, what I was doing back then. And I wouldn't have been able to label it that way then, but I can do that now, as I was taking these terrible wounds and trauma I experienced, and I was converting them into a sacred wound. And a sacred wound is a wound that you begin to heal. And through that healing, you can now start to share it with others and make a difference in their lives. It becomes something that enhances who we are, that gives rather than subtracts from us. So that's how my journey started. I mean, what a launch in the recovery that was. And then I became a counselor. In fact, I was a counselor at the center. I started to work with other Vietnam vets, and I started to see the value of being able to give back some of what I was learning. I got so turned on to recovery and turned on to helping people, and went back to school, and off I go. Now, what does this consciousness look like today? So that was my way of living. What does our way of living look like? It's so different, right? The guiding principles today for me can be summarized as follow. I try to act for myself without being selfish. Say that again. I try to act for myself without being selfish. Well, that requires how my behavior has an impact on those around me and those in my life and those people that are important to me and otherwise. I try not to impinge on the rights of other people, but respect them. I didn't respect other people before. My way of life before was all about figuring out what you could or couldn't do for me. I didn't see you as a person in and of yourself to be enjoyed and to be respected and to be experienced. No, you were an object and you were an it. That's the way Dr. Martin Buber calls it, is that we have an I to it relationship with the world when we're immature. And we see the world as an object that's there to meet our needs, because that's that environmental support I'm looking for, that emotional dependence. So I can't enjoy you as you are. I've got to always figure out what you can do for me, or are you going to approve of me or disapprove of me? And so you're an it, you're not a person to me. Well, as I started to grow along these lines, my relationship with you changed. I started to see you as who you are, not as I want you to be or as I fantasize or think I need you to be. I don't need you to be anything other than you are. I need to be what I need to be. I don't need you to be anything. I've taken that back. So now my relationships with you are much more subjective. They're more personal. I can really sit and enjoy an experience with another person and walk away from that feeling so filled without them ever giving me anything other than who they are. That's the gift that we have to offer each other, is who we truly are. And there's a lot to that. And we don't know it. My self-esteem never understood that. My self-esteem was so low. If we define self-esteem in the way that Dr. Nathaniel Branden does, as our reputation with ourselves, my reputation with myself was terrible. I would not want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member. It was that kind of a thing, right? But today I feel very different about that. So that's a really big shift. So I try to act for myself without being selfish, with having an awareness of you and having you in the situation. And so by doing that, I'm honoring two powerful desires inside of me: the desire to be myself and the desire to be in relationship with you. We talk about emotional sobriety as balance. That's the balance we're talking about right there, is to balance my need to be myself with my need to stay connected to you at the same time. That's the balance I believe that Bill was trying to talk about, but he talked about it in his way. I talk about it as more of a, as a psychologist. The other thing that I've realized, and that is our way of life today, is to act for others without being selfless. I do not sacrifice myself for relationships. I do not give myself away as much as I used to. If I do something for you, it's because I want to do it, and I give it to you with an open hand. It's not selfless. It's important for me. And so when I give it to you, it's a gift that I offer. And if you accept it, that's fine. If it doesn't work for you, I can be open to what you want, because it's not about me being appreciated for the gift. It's about giving something that's of value to you. So I can act for others without being selfless. I can pay attention that I want to be giving what I want to be giving. I'm not doing it to get some appreciation for you. The appreciation, the reward I get is intrinsic. I do it because it's what I want to do. That's a very different way. I erased myself all the time before. My way of life was to erase myself, not to consider myself and not to consider you. See, that's the crazy thing about it. In emotional sobriety, I realized that I'm as important as you are, not more and not less. But I also respect that we're not the same, that there's differences between us. And that's okay. Those differences are important, and I want to know what they are, and I want to respect them. And if I don't, I consider that my problem, not yours, that you're not living up to my expectations. You don't have to. You have to figure out what your path is on. God, as I sit here sharing all this with you, I realize what an incredible journey this has been. It's just been remarkable. It's been remarkable. Even now, I've gone through this situation with my ex-wife and dealing with divorce and betrayal. And boy, Susie and Patrick can tell you, man, I had some pretty dark nights of the soul. Called up and cried to Susie many times, and with Patrick and other people, Herb and other my friends and stuff. And times I didn't see what the next would look like. It was very hard. But that's the other thing I found in this fellowship. The support I've gotten from all of you that know me personally and are close to me has gotten me through another tough one, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am forever grateful for all of that. And, I feel that this is, in fact, I just had a session before I got on with this Dr. Miller that I've been working with. He's the author of a book called Intimate Terrorism. Unfortunately, most of our relationships turn out that way. Intimate terrorism. It sure describes what I've experienced. And, he was telling me, man, if you can just stay with this like you have before, you're in a lot of pain, you're going to suffer a lot. But if you can stay pressed up against it, that's Herb's words, not Dr. Miller's, but he say, if you can stay present to it, what you'll get out of this is more emotional wisdom. And I really feel that's happening for me. Now, more than ever before in my life, I'm not as self-reliant as I was. I can ask for help when I need it. I can turn to you and let you in my life. Now, more than ever, I'm learning how to be safe and not be safe by being self-reliant and by being invulnerable, but by being safe, by paying attention to reality and what's going on and not expecting things from you that you're not capable of giving me. That's a setup. That's never going to make me feel safe, is to not have an appropriate and honest relationship with reality. And that created a lot of my lack of safety. So I think that being said, I've shared with you for 50 minutes. We can open it up for a few minutes if you'd like. And if you'd like to make a comment or share something or whatever you want to do, there's room for that.
Have you observed changes in emotional maturity across generations in the last 50 years and noticed any impact on your own children due to your work?
Yes, I have seen an evolution. First of all, in terms of the recovery community, finally, emotional sobriety is starting to be talked about. And I think the way that Bill Wilson hoped back in 1953 when he wrote that letter to someone back in California. So I think Bill would be very pleased with what he's seeing today. I think the impact on my family can be evident in what I share and what I've shared following. For example, my son got married about, I think it was about 7 years ago. And I asked him, hey, Nick, what would you like to do for, your bachelor's party? You want me to take you to Vegas? Things that a lot of guys like to do, right? Strip bars or whatever. You know what he said, Zoe? Dad, would you see if your sponsor, Tom, could come out to California and spend a day with me and you talking about what it means to be a husband and how I can best show up in that marriage. I got goosebumps sharing that with you. Love what Patrick and Susie, you guys have all created here. Thanks for your service, and thanks for really supporting my work and finding value in it. It means the world to me to be able to share this with all of you. So